Not gonna lie, when I first saw this trending again, I rolled my eyes. But then I started reading the unsealed documents, and my jaw actually dropped. This is not just Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni anymore. Taylor Swift is involved. Ryan Reynolds is involved. Other cast members are involved. There are texts that feel strategic, texts that feel emotional, and texts that honestly feel messy on every level. So today we're walking through what was revealed, how people are reacting, and why this might be one of those cases where nobody walks away looking great. Okay, so this just got way messier than anyone expected. Hundreds of pages of sealed court documents in the Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni lawsuit are now public, and they are blowing the doors off everything we thought we understood. We're talking text messages, emails, depositions, internal conversations tied to the movie It Ends With Us. And suddenly, this isn't just about a bad set experience or creative differences. Taylor Swift's name is in the filings. Ryan Reynolds is texting people behind the scenes. Matt Damon and Ben Affleck are being asked to weigh in on edits. And the internet is scrambling to decide who the villain is supposed to be. Except the problem is that the documents make almost everyone look questionable in their own way. When these documents first started circulating, I genuinely thought people would be tired of this story by now. But the opposite happened. The more context that comes out, the more confusing it gets. Because you cannot understand this case by reading one screenshot or one viral quote. You actually have to read how people were talking to each other, what they were reacting to, and when they were reacting. If you only read Justin's messages, you might walk away thinking Blake was controlling and dismissive. If you only read Blake's messages, you might believe Justin was unprofessional and manipulative. And if you read the texts involving Taylor Swift, I get why people are shocked. Because they sound strategic, emotional, and very human all at once. Which is not how fans usually picture any of these people. What makes this week feel explosive is that this is the clearest look we've had at how power, ego, insecurity, and image all collided during this film. This isn't just about one bad interaction on set, it's about who controlled the movie, who felt undermined, who felt unsafe, and who felt entitled to make calls that maybe weren't theirs to make. And as these unsealed documents spread online, people aren't just picking sides anymore. They're questioning friendships, public feminist branding, and whether anyone involved handled this situation with clean hands, especially when you start seeing how early the tone was set behind the scenes, before the cameras even stopped rolling, and before anyone realized how public all of this would become once those messages were no longer private. To understand why these unsealed documents hit so hard, you have to rewind to summer 2024, when It Ends With Us was gearing up for release, and something already felt off. Blake Lively was out doing press in her usual upbeat, polished way, talking about florals and fashion, while Justin Baldoni was promoting the movie completely separately and leaning hard into the seriousness of the subject matter. That contrast alone set off alarms online because people were asking why the lead actress and the director were not presenting a united front, especially for a film centered on domestic violence. The internet started sniffing around, and that's when the unfollows started. The awkward interviews and the speculation about on-set tension really kicked off. By December, things escalated fast. A major newspaper published an article detailing Blake's claims that Justin had created a hostile work environment and that his team allegedly worked behind the scenes to undermine her reputation after she raised concerns. The article included messages that made it seem like there was a coordinated effort to control the narrative, and public opinion swung sharply toward Blake almost overnight. Justin responded forcefully, denying her claims and accusing the article of cherry-picking texts to paint him in the worst possible light. He didn't just push back in interviews either. He filed lawsuits, including one against the paper itself, and released behind-the-scenes footage that he claimed contradicted Blake's version of events. That footage became a turning point. People watched clips Blake described as uncomfortable or inappropriate, and didn't see what they expected to see, which caused another massive shift in public opinion. Suddenly, Blake's credibility was being questioned, and Justin started regaining sympathy, but instead of resolving anything, the case dragged on, legal fees mounted, and resentment clearly deepened on all sides. What the unsealed documents now reveal is that, while this was playing out publicly, privately, there were intense conversations happening about control, edits, reputations, and power. These weren't calm disagreements. They were emotionally charged exchanges that show how quickly the situation stopped being about making a movie and started being about winning. Once the unsealed documents started circulating, the internet did what it always does, and immediately zoomed in on the juiciest receipts. Screenshots of texts were flying everywhere, stripped of context, turned into captions, and treated like final judgments. Some people latched onto Blake's messages and said they proved she was calculating and power-hungry. Others focused on Justin's exchanges and said they confirmed everything Blake had been warning about. And then there were the texts involving other cast members, which honestly complicated things even more, because they suggested Blake was not the only one who felt uneasy on that set. Several messages between Blake and other actors painted a picture of frustration, anxiety, and confusion about leadership. People online were especially shaken by cast members describing behavior that made them uncomfortable, including comments that crossed professional lines, and moments where boundaries felt blurry. For a lot of viewers, that shifted the conversation from creative control to workplace culture. At the same time, critics were quick to point out that Blake's tone in some messages came across dismissive, even cruel, especially when talking about Justin's abilities and future in the industry. That's where the reaction really split. Because some people said it sounded like a woman protecting her work, while others said it sounded like someone wielding influence without regard for the fallout. And then came the Taylor Swift texts, which honestly sent the internet into a full spiral. Fans were dissecting every line, every emoji, every joke, and reading it all as strategy rather than friendship. Some people were furious that Taylor appeared to support Blake's creative push so openly, arguing that it blurred the line between loyalty and manipulation. Others defended her, saying if your close friend calls you crying about a terrible experience, of course you back them. Travis Kelce even got dragged into the discourse, which felt like peak internet behavior, because suddenly people were projecting this entire legal mess onto unrelated relationships. What stood out to me most was how many people changed their stance yet again. Viewers who once felt firmly Team Blake started saying, "Okay, this doesn't look great." Others who were riding hard for Justin paused when they saw how many people behind the scenes seemed to have issues with him, and instead of clarity, the reactions created this weird emotional whiplash, where sympathy, judgment, and disbelief were all happening at once, making it impossible to pretend this was a simple good versus bad story anymore. This is where the story starts to hit differently, because none of this happened in a vacuum. Long before these documents were unsealed, there were already whispers about power struggles on this film, and about Justin's reputation behind the scenes. Blake was very open in interviews about liking to be deeply involved in projects, having a say in scripts, and shaping the final product. That alone is not a crime. But when you pair that with a movie where the director is also the co-star, producer, and studio head, it creates a pressure cooker situation, where boundaries were never going to be clean. At the same time, Justin's public image made everything more complicated. He built a brand around being a feminist ally, hosting conversations about masculinity, and positioning himself as someone who understood women's experiences. So when multiple people connected to the film described feeling uncomfortable or dismissed, it didn't just feel like normal set drama, it felt like a disconnect between what he preached publicly and how he allegedly operated privately. Former collaborators distancing themselves from him, including people tied to his podcast and production company, added weight to those concerns, even as his defenders argued that none of this justified Blake's attempt to take control of the film. What really deepens the mess is how personal it all became. These weren't neutral professional exchanges, they were texts sent late at night, full of venting, sarcasm, and emotional processing. Blake clearly felt unsupported and underestimated, while Justin appeared to feel undermined and stripped of authority. And once friends and industry heavyweights got pulled in, the conflict stopped being about who made the better cut, and became about validation, survival, and reputation. Everyone involved started moving defensively, assuming the worst intentions, and trying to protect themselves before the story went public. When you step back and look at the timeline, it's hard not to see how quickly this escalated from tension to total breakdown. The lawsuits, the media coverage, the unsealed texts, all of it reflects people who felt wronged and reacted in ways that only inflamed things further. By the time these documents were released, the damage was already done, and whatever sympathy anyone once had was now being weighed against months of messy behavior. That makes it very hard to crown a hero. So, after reading through all of this, the unsealed documents, the texts, the reactions, the shifting narratives, here's where I land. And I know not everyone is going to love this take. I really do not think this is a story where one person walks away clean. Blake clearly wanted control of this movie. Badly. She pushed for her version. She pulled in powerful friends, and she spoke about Justin in ways that sound dismissive and cutting, even if she felt justified at the time. At the same time, wanting control does not cancel out the possibility that she experienced behavior on set that made her uncomfortable, or crossed lines. Two things can be true at once, even if that makes people uncomfortable. When it comes to Justin, the unsealed messages and corroboration from others make it hard to brush everything off as misunderstanding or bad optics. Multiple people describing similar discomfort is not nothing, and his carefully crafted public image makes the allegations feel heavier, not lighter. Even if some claims were exaggerated or poorly communicated, the pattern of people distancing themselves from him raises real questions. And once you're the person preaching allyship, the margin for error gets very small. Add in the legal maneuvering, the PR strategies, and the defensiveness, and it starts to feel like the situation spiraled because no one slowed down to de-escalate. What really stuck with me, though, is how human all of this sounds. These are not polished press releases. These are private texts full of fear, ego, sarcasm, exhaustion, and paranoia. You can hear how isolated Blake felt and how embattled Justin seemed. And once that mindset takes over, people stop making generous choices. They start making survival choices. That does not excuse bad behavior, but it does explain why this became so ugly so fast. As for what happens next, I honestly think this case will continue to drag on. With no satisfying winner, careers will shift quietly, friendships will cool, and everyone involved will probably wish certain messages were never sent in the first place. Public opinion will keep swinging, because new context keeps surfacing, and nothing about this story is simple, and that might be the biggest takeaway here. Hollywood conflicts rarely fit into neat boxes, and this one especially feels like a cautionary tale about power, perception, and what happens when everything you thought was private suddenly belongs to the internet. I really want to know what you think after seeing all of this laid out. Do you feel differently now than you did months ago? Or are you still firmly on one side? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because this one has layers, and I'm curious where you land.